A small wooden stage perched on the sand, fairy lights twinkling between swaying palm trees, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly behind me. The Save Our Shores fundraiser wasn't exactly Madison Square Garden, but it was a gig, and in those days, I took whatever I could get. My manager had pitched it as good exposure for a good cause, the kind of corporate speak that usually meant free labor wrapped in feel-good packaging. I'd arrived early to set up, my guitar case heavy in my hand, my nerves doing their usual. Pre-show dance. The stage was smaller than I'd expected, intimate in a way that made me feel exposed. I prefer bigger venues where I can lose myself in the lights and pretend the audience is just a warm, faceless mass. Here, I could see every person, every expression. It terrified me. I was tuning my guitar, trying to find my center, when I first saw her. Kennedy Walsh moved across that beach like she owned it, like the sand and sea and sky all bent to her will. Sun-bleached hair escaped from a loose braid, catching the golden hour light. She had a clipboard in one hand and was directing volunteers, with this effortless authority that made my stomach flip. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled at me from across the sand. She was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't just that. It was the way she moved with purpose, the way she seemed completely comfortable in her own skin. Everything about her radiated confidence and authenticity, qualities I'd been faking for so long, I'd forgotten what they actually felt like. When those ocean blue eyes finally landed on me, I swear something inside my chest shifted, rearranged itself, made room for something I didn't even know was coming. She walked over with this knowing smirk, like she could see right through all my carefully constructed defenses. "You're up next," she said, handing me a water bottle. "Try not to hypnotize the crowd too much. We still need them to donate." Her voice had this warm, teasing quality that made me want to lean closer. For the first time in years, my fingers stumbled on the chords. Elena Martinez, who'd been playing guitar since she was 12, who could perform in her sleep, suddenly couldn't remember how to hold a pick properly. "I'll do my best to keep the enchantment to a minimum," I managed, trying to match her playful tone while my heart hammered against my ribs. She laughed, this genuine, unguarded sound that made something in my chest crack open. Something tells me that's not really possible. The way she said it, like it was a compliment and a challenge rolled into one, left me speechless. She walked away before I could respond, but I felt her presence like a physical thing, warm and electric and absolutely terrifying. When I finally took the stage, the crowd was bigger than I'd expected. Families on blankets, couples sharing bottles of wine, environmental activists with passionate eyes. But all I could see was Kennedy, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, watching me with this intensity that made my skin tingle. I opened with one of my safer songs, something I'd written years ago about heartbreak and healing. It was pretty melodic, designed to be palatable. The kind of music my ex Sarah had always pushed me toward, marketable, she'd called it, broadly appealing. But something about Kennedy's gaze made me restless, made me want to dig deeper, to offer something real instead of something safe. So I put down my set list and reached for my guitar's capo. "This next song," I found myself saying into the microphone, "is something I've never performed live before. It's about the ocean, about how it calls to you even when you're afraid of drowning." I don't know where those words came from. I'd written Undertow 6 months earlier during one of my late-night anxiety spirals, pouring all my fear and longing into lyrics I never intended anyone to hear. It was too raw, too honest, too much. But with Kennedy watching me, I couldn't seem to stop myself from singing it. The song built slowly, starting with simple finger-picking and my voice barely above a whisper. It was about the pull of something you want but can't have. About standing at the edge of the water knowing it might consume you but being unable to walk away. As I sang, I watched Kennedy's expression change from casual interest to something deeper, more focused. By the final chorus, I was lost in the music the way I used to be before the industry got its hooks in me. Before I learned to second guess every word, every note, every breath. For those 4 minutes, I was just Elena, not the Elena who tried to please everyone, but the Elena who felt everything too deeply and wasn't afraid to show it. When the last note faded into the sound of the waves, the silence stretched long, enough to make me panic. Had I gone too far? Then too much? Then the applause started, warm and genuine, and I remembered how to breathe. But Kennedy's reaction was what really mattered. She was still watching me, but now her expression was different. Softer, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find. After my set, I was packing up my guitar when I felt her approach. My hands were shaking, partly from the performance adrenaline, partly from her proximity. "That last song," she said, her voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear her over the crowd. "Where did that come from?" I fumbled with my guitar case latches, hyper aware of her standing so close I could smell her sunscreen and something else, something that made me think of salt air and wildflowers. Just something I wrote. Probably too weird for this crowd. Too weird? She stepped closer, and I felt the air between us charge like the atmosphere before a storm. "Elena, you were magnificent. You were free up there. Like you finally stopped apologizing for taking up space." Her words hit me like a physical blow, mainly because they were so accurate it hurt. When had I started apologizing for existing? When had I become so small? I don't usually ... I started, then stopped. How do you explain that you've been hiding yourself for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen? "What's your story?" Kennedy asked, settling onto the sand beside my equipment. The fundraiser was winding down around us, volunteers cleaning up while the last families packed their blankets. "And don't give me the biosheet version, tell me something real." I should have deflected. Should have given her the same polished answers I gave in interviews. Instead, I found myself sitting down beside her, drawn by her genuine curiosity and the way the setting sun made her skin glow. "I used to write songs that mattered," I heard myself say. Songs that said something. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough. Kennedy was quiet for a moment, watching the waves roll in. What changed? My ex, Sarah, she had very specific ideas about what success looked like. What I should sound like, look like, be like. The words came easier than I expected, maybe because Kennedy listened without judgment, without trying to fix or minimize. She said I'd never make it if I was too much of myself. And you believed her? The simple question cut straight to the heart of it. Had I believed her? Or had I just been so afraid of being alone that I'd been willing to become someone else? I thought I did, but tonight, singing that song, ... I trailed off, not sure how to explain the feeling of coming back to myself. "Tonight you remembered who you are?" Kennedy said simply. Something about the way she said it so matter-of-fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world, made my chest tight with emotion I couldn't name. We talked as the beach emptied around us, about music and marine biology, and the way the ocean never stops moving. Kennedy told me about her research on coral restoration, her voice lighting up as she described diving in kelp forests and cataloging species most people would never see. I told her about writing songs in my car at 2 a.m., about the lyrics that came to me in dreams. "There's something about the water," she said as we walked toward the parking lot. "It doesn't lie. It just is what it is, completely and unapologetically." I wanted to ask if she thought people could be like that too, but my courage only extended so far. Instead, I thanked her for listening and headed for my car, feeling her eyes on me until I disappeared into the darkness. I drove home with Undertow, playing on repeat, remembering what it felt like to sing something true. I spent the next week trying to convince myself that the evening at the beach had been a fluke, that the electricity I'd felt with Kennedy was just performance adrenaline mixed with too much wine from the fundraiser, that the way she looked at me, like she could see past all my carefully constructed walls, was just my imagination running wild. I was wrong, of course, but denial has always been one of my more polished skills. My phone buzzed on Tuesday morning while I was nursing. My third cup of coffee and staring at a blank page in my songwriting journal. Unknown number, local area code. Elena, this is Kennedy Walsh from the Save Our Shores event. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the volunteer coordinator. Her voice through the phone was just as warm as I remembered, and my heart did this ridiculous little skip that I tried to pretend didn't happen. Kennedy, hi. Of course, no problem. I was proud of how normal I sounded, despite the fact that just hearing her name made my palms sweat. So, we're doing a beach cleanup this Saturday, and I was wondering if you'd like to join us. Consider it community service for all that crowd hypnotizing you did at the fundraiser. I could hear the smile in her voice, and despite myself, I smiled back. I don't know, I'm not really the beach cleanup type. I'm more of a stay inside and write sad songs type. Perfect. We need someone to document the experience. You could bring your guitar, play for the volunteers during lunch break. And she paused, and I could practically feel her grin through the phone. I promise there will be coffee. Really good coffee. She had me a coffee, but I pretended to. Consider it for the sake of my dignity. Well, when you put it like that, great. Meet us at Lighthouse Beach at 8. And Elena, bring that song you played Saturday, the real one. She hung up before I could ask what she meant by that, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what I'd just agreed to. Saturday morning arrived gray and foggy, typical June weather for the Central Coast. I almost used it as an excuse to bail, but something about Kennedy's invitation had lodged itself under my skin. Maybe it was her certainty that I'd show up, like she could see something in me that I couldn't see in myself. I found the cleanup crew easily enough, about 20 people in Save Our Shores t-shirts, armed with trash bags and grabber tools. Kennedy spotted me immediately, waving from where she was distributing supplies. She looked even better than I remembered, if that was possible. Her hair was in a high ponytail today, and she wore board shorts that showed off legs that went on forever. When she smiled at me, I felt that same electric jolt as the night we met. You came, she said, handing me a trash bag and one of those grabber sticks. You promised coffee, I replied, trying to keep things light despite the way my pulse quickened. Whenever she was near, woman of my word. She gestured toward a table set up with thermoses and pastries. But coffee comes after we earn it. Team leaders, let's divide up the beach. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of plastic bottles, cigarette butts, and more fishing line than I'd ever seen in my life. Kennedy worked beside me, chatting easily about ocean currents and microplastics while I tried not to stare at the way her t-shirt rode up when she bent over to collect trash. So tell me, she said as we worked our way toward the tide pools, what's the real Elena Martinez story? Not the Wikipedia version. I poked at a half-buried bottle cap with my grabber. What makes you think there's more to it? Because Saturday night you sang like someone who's lived through something. Songs like that don't come from nowhere. Her perceptiveness made me uncomfortable in the best possible way. Most people were content with surface-level interactions, but Kennedy seemed determined to dig deeper. I grew up in Bakersfield, I said finally. Started playing guitar because it was the only thing that made sense when everything else felt chaotic. My parents fought constantly money, jobs, whose fault it was that they were so miserable. Music was my escape. Is that when you started writing? I nodded, remembering those early songs scribbled in composition notebooks, hidden under my mattress like contraband. Terrible stuff, mostly. Angsty teenager poetry set to basic chord progressions. But it felt important, like I was saying something that mattered. What happened to that feeling? The question hit deeper than I expected. I moved to LA for college. Started playing open mics, trying to make connections. Met Sarah at a showcase when I was 22. Even saying her name made my chest tighten. Kennedy noticed immediately. Bad breakup? More like slow suffocation disguised as a relationship. The words came out more bitter than I intended. She was already established in the industry, manager, connections, knew how to work the system. She saw potential in me, or at least her version of potential. Kennedy had stopped collecting trash and was giving me her full attention now. Something about her steady presence made it easier to continue. At first, it felt like support. She helped me book better gigs, introduced me to people who could advance my career. But gradually, her suggestions became requirements. My songs were too dark, too personal. My look was too alternative. My stage presence was too intense. She wanted to change you. She wanted to package me, make me palatable, marketable. And I let her because I thought that was what love looked like. Someone caring enough about your success to help you improve. I grabbed a plastic bag that had wrapped itself around some seaweed, yanking harder than necessary. By the time I realized what was happening, I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was performing songs I didn't believe in, wearing clothes that felt like costumes, smiling on cue like a wind-up doll. How long were you together? 3 years? 3 years of gradually disappearing into her vision of who I should be. I straightened up, brushing sand off my knees. The breakup was brutal. She told me I'd never make it on my own, that I was too weird, too much, too emotional, that I should be grateful she'd tried to help me at all. Kennedy's jaw tightened. She sounds delightful. Despite everything, I laughed. She had her moments. But you know what the worst part was? After she left, I realized she was right about one thing. I had no idea who I was anymore. I'd been performing her version of Elena Martinez for so long that I'd forgotten what the original felt like. Is that why Saturday night was so powerful? Because you remembered? I stopped walking and looked at her, really looked at her. Kennedy had this way of asking questions that cut straight to the truth. Like she could see through all the stories I told myself. Maybe, or maybe it was you. The admission slipped out before I could stop it, hanging in the salt air between. As Kennedy's eyes widened slightly, and I felt heat creep up my neck. I started to backtrack, but she held up her hand. Don't take it back. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of green in her blue eyes. Elena, you were incredible up there. Not because you were trying to be someone else, but because you were completely yourself. It was like watching someone come alive. The intensity in her voice made my breath catch. We were standing in the shallows now, waves lapping at our feet. And I felt like I was drowning in the best possible way. I don't know how to do that, I whispered. Be myself. It's been so long. Then let me help you remember. Before I could ask what she meant, a wave larger than the others soaked us both up to our knees. We jumped back, laughing, the moment broken but not forgotten. Kennedy grabbed my hand to steady me, and the contact sent electricity up my arm. Come on, she said, not letting go. Break time. I promised you coffee, and I promised the volunteers music. She led me back up the beach, our hands still linked, and I tried not to read too much into the way her thumb brushed across my knuckles. The volunteer lunch break was set up under a pop-up canopy, complete with sandwiches, fruit, and the promised excellent coffee. Kennedy had clearly planned this carefully. creating a relaxed atmosphere that felt more like a beach party than volunteer work. Elena's going to play for us while we eat, Kennedy announced, producing a folding chair and gesture toward my guitar case. And I have it on good authority that we're in for something special. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me expectantly, and I felt the familiar flutter of pre-performance nerves. But something about this crowd felt different, warmer, more accepting. Maybe it was the casual setting, or maybe it was Kennedy's encouraging smile from across the circle. I tuned quickly and started with something safe, an acoustic version of a Joni Mitchell song that everyone could hum along to. The volunteers relaxed into their lunches, chatting quietly while I played background music. But then Kennedy caught. May I now that the real one. My fingers found the opening chords of Undertow before my brain could stop them. This time, singing it felt different, less desperate, more hopeful. Like maybe admitting you're drowning is the first step toward learning how to swim. When I finished, the silence was profound. Then one of the volunteers, an older woman with paint-stained fingers, started clapping slowly. That was beautiful, honey. You wrote that? I nodded, feeling exposed but not ashamed. You should record it, said a younger guy with Calpin. His hair. Seriously, that's the kind of song that changes people. The conversation shifted to music and artistry, with several volunteers sharing their own creative pursuits. I found myself relaxing, participating naturally instead of performing my way through social interaction. Kennedy sat beside me as the group began to disperse back to cleanup duty. How did that feel? She asked quietly. Terrifying, exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff and discovering you can fly. She smiled, that knowing smile that made my insides flutter. Good, that's exactly how it should feel. The rest of the cleanup passed quickly, filled with easy conversation and the comfortable rhythm of working alongside people who shared a common purpose. Kennedy stayed close, occasionally brushing my arm when she reached for trash, making casual contact that left me hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. As we packed up the supplies, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Elena, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you seeing anyone? The question was so direct it caught me off guard. No, definitely not. I'm still recovering from the Sarah situation. Why? Instead of answering immediately, Kennedy pulled out her phone. There's a new restaurant in Morro Bay I've been wanting to try. They have live music on Thursday nights, and I thought, maybe you'd like to go with me? My heart did that skip thing again, more pronounced this time. Like ... like a date. Yes, Elena, like a date. The way she said it straightforward. No games, no ambiguity was so refreshing after years of Sarah's emotional manipulation that I almost said yes immediately. Almost. I should probably mention that I'm still figuring things out, I said, hating how uncertain I sounded. The breakup was pretty recent, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what? For someone like you. Kennedy laughed, but it wasn't unkind. What's someone like me? I gestured helplessly at her, from her confident posture to her easy smile to the way she seemed completely comfortable in her own skin. Beautiful. Successful, put together, the kind of person who knows who they are and isn't afraid to take up space. Elena. Her voice was gentle but firm. You just described yourself. No, you're beautiful. Your music is incredible, which makes you successful at what matters most. And tonight, watching you share your real songs with people, you took up exactly the space you deserved. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. I don't feel like that person. Then let me show you what I see. The offer hung between us, loaded with possibility and promise. Part of me wanted to run, to retreat back into the safety of self-doubt and isolation. But a bigger part, the part that had been awakened by singing Undertow under the stars, wanted to stay. and see what might happen if I was brave enough to try. Okay, I said before I could change my mind. Thursday. But I get to pick the music if it's terrible. Kennedy's smile lit up her entire face. Deal. I'll pick you up at 7. As I drove home that evening, sandy and exhausted and buzzing with anticipation, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was excited about the future instead of afraid of it. And it was all because of a woman who saw something in me that I was only beginning to remember existed. Thursday couldn't come fast enough, and also came way too soon. I spent the entire day fluctuating between excitement and panic, changing outfits 4 times before settling on a sundress that felt like me flowy. A little bohemian, comfortable enough to move in, but pretty enough to be special. Kennedy picked. Mia bright at 7 in a beat-up Jeep Wrangler, with sand permanently embedded in the floor mats and a surfboard strapped to the roof. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes and made my breath catch when she smiled at me. "You look beautiful," she said as I climbed into the passenger seat, and the straightforward compliment made me blush like a teenager. "So do you." I managed, trying not to stare at the way her dress highlighted the golden tan she'd earned from all those hours on the beach. The restaurant she'd chosen was perfect, a small place right on the water with tables on a deck that jutted out over the bay. The live music was provided by a local duo playing acoustic covers, good enough to create atmosphere without demanding attention. "This is lovely," I said as we settled at a table near the railing, the water lapping softly beneath us. "I hoped you'd like it. I thought about somewhere fancier, but—" Kennedy shrugged, looking almost shy for the first time since I'd met her. "This felt more like us." "US." The word sent a warm flutter through my chest. Was there an us already? We ordered wine and appetizers, falling into conversation as easily as we had on the beach. Kennedy told me about growing up in Santa Barbara, how she'd always felt more at home in the ocean than on land. I shared stories from my childhood, the good ones, this time late nights writing songs by flashlight, my first guitar purchased with babysitting money, the rush of performing at my high school talent show. "What made you choose marine biology?" I asked as we shared a plate of oysters that Kennedy insisted were life-changing. "I was 12 when I first went diving," she said, her eyes lighting up the way they always did when she talked about the ocean. "My uncle took me out to Channel Islands, and the moment I went underwater, everything just clicked. It was like discovering a whole other world that most people never see." She described her research with the same passion I felt when writing songs, that sense of purpose, of calling, of knowing you were exactly where you belonged. "What about you?" she asked. "When did you know music, was it?" I thought about it, swirling the wine in my glass. I was 15, going through a rough patch with my parents' divorce. I'd written the song about feeling invisible, like I was disappearing a little more each day. I played it at an open mic night, terrified I'd embarrass myself. And this woman came up to me afterward, probably in her 60s, with tears in her eyes. She said my song had perfectly captured how she'd felt during her own divorce 30 years earlier. That's when I realized music wasn't just about expressing yourself, it was about connecting with people, making them feel less alone. Kennedy reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "That's exactly what you did Saturday night. And again today at the cleanup." Her touch sent warmth racing up my arm, and I found myself staring at our joined hands. When had someone's simple touch affected me this much? "Elena," Kennedy said softly, and I looked up to meet her eyes. "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Sarah really did a number on you, didn't she?" The question hit like a gentle slap, unexpected but not unkind. I pulled my hand back, wrapping it around my wine glass for something to hold on to. "I'm sorry," Kennedy said immediately. I don't mean to pry. It's just ... You seem so surprised when people appreciate you for who you are. Like you've been convinced you're not worth appreciating. She was right, of course. Sarah's influence had been insidious, a slow erosion of self-worth disguised as helpful criticism. By the end, I'd been so used to being told I wasn't enough. But I'd stopped believing I could be. She was very good at making her opinions seem like facts, I said finally. Very convincing about what was wrong with me and how I needed to change to be acceptable. And you believed her. I wanted to believe that someone could love me enough to help me become better. I didn't realize until too late that she didn't want to improve me. She wanted to replace me. Kennedy was quiet for a moment, watching. The sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it, but I nodded anyway. I see someone incredibly talented who's forgotten how to trust her own instincts. Someone beautiful who's been convinced she's not. Someone with so much to offer who's been told she's too much. Kennedy leaned forward, her voice intense. Elena, you're not too much. You're not too weird or too emotional or too anything. You're exactly the right amount of you. Tears pricked up my eyes, and I blinked them back. You don't know me that well yet. No, but I know what I've seen. And what I've seen is someone worth getting to know better. The sincerity in her voice made my chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had spoken to me like this? Like I was worth believing in? I scare myself sometimes, I admitted. When I write, when I perform ... There's this intensity that comes through. Sarah always said it was too much, that I needed to tone it down. God, I hope you don't. Kennedy's voice was fierce. That intensity is what makes your music powerful. It's what made everyone at the cleanup stop talking and really listen. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. Elena, can I be completely honest with you? I nodded, though part of me wanted to run. Saturday night, when you sang Undertow, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Your music reached inside me and touched something I didn't even know was there. That's not too much, that's magic. The air between us crackled with electricity, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. Everything in me wanted to lean into this feeling, to trust Kennedy's words and her steady gaze and the way she made me feel like I was enough. But Sarah's voice echoed in my head. You'll never make it if you're too much of yourself. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. Do what? Trust someone who says they like me as I am? What if you're wrong? What if I really aim too much and you just haven't figured it out yet? Kennedy reached for my hand again, this time holding on when I tried to pull away. Elena, look at me. I met her eyes, seeing nothing but warmth and certainty. I'm not... Sarah, I'm not trying to change you or manage you or turn you into someone else. I like you exactly as you are, messy emotions, intense music, overthinking brain and all. How can you be so sure? Because I pay attention? Because I see how you light up when you talk about music, how you care about people, how you're brave. Enough to put your real feelings into songs, even when it scares you. Kennedy's thumb brushed across my knuckles. And because every instinct I have is telling me that you're someone special, someone worth taking a risk on. The words hung between. U.S. as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in shades of purple and gold. I wanted to believe her so badly it physically hurt. What if I'm not ready? I asked. What if I'm still too broken from everything with Sarah? Then we go slow. We figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations beyond seeing where this leads. The offer was so gentle, so patient, that it made my eyes well up again. This time, I didn't try to hide the tears. I'd like that, I said quietly. Kennedy's smile was radiant. Yeah, But fair warning, I'm probably going to be a mess for a while. I have trust issues and abandonment fears and a tendency to overthink everything. Good thing I'm patient. And I write songs about my feelings. Lots of songs. Sometimes they're dark and weird and not radio friendly. Even better, I want to hear all of them. I laughed despite the tears. You say that now, Elena? Kennedy's voice was serious again. I mean it. All of you, the light parts and the dark parts and everything in between. That's what I'm interested in. The waiter brought our entrees then, breaking the intensity of the moment, but not the connection. We talked more lightly as we ate, sharing stories and discovering small compatibilities. We both preferred night swimming to day swimming. Both cried at animated movies. Both believed that good coffee could solve most problems. After dinner, Kennedy suggested a walk along the beach. We kicked off our shoes and strolled through the shallows, the cool water lapping at our feet while the stars emerged overhead. Thank you, I said as we walked. For tonight, for seeing something in me worth pursuing. It's been a long time since anyone made me feel like I was worth the effort. Elena. Kennedy stopped walking and turned to face me. You're not a project to be worked on or a problem to be solved. You're a person worth knowing, worth caring about, worth... She stopped herself, but I heard the unfinished word hanging in the air between us. Worth loving. The moment stretched, loaded with possibility. Kennedy was standing close enough that I could see the starlight reflected in her eyes, could smell her perfume mixing with the salt air. Everything in me wanted to close the distance between us, to find out what her lips tasted like, to lose myself in the feeling of being wanted exactly as I was. Instead, I stepped back. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I want to, I do, but hey. Kennedy's voice was gentle. It's okay. We said we'd go slow, remember? I nodded, grateful for her understanding, but frustrated with myself for being such a coward. Can I ask you something? Kennedy said as we started walking again. Sure. What would have to happen for you to trust that someone could love you without trying to change you? The question stopped me in my tracks. What would have to happen? How do you unlearn years of being told you're not enough? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe ... Maybe if someone stuck around long enough to see all my flaws and didn't run away. What if I told you I'm not much of a runner? The quiet conviction in her voice made my heart skip. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. Then I guess I'll have to prove it to you. We walked in comfortable silence after that, both lost in our own thoughts. When Kennedy dropped me off at my apartment, she walked me to the door like a proper gentleman. I had a wonderful time tonight, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Me too. Even though I'm complicated and damaged, I'm probably going to drive you crazy. Kennedy laughed. Elena, you're not damaged. You're human. There's a difference. She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, so brief and gentle that I barely had time to register the warmth of her lips before she was stepping back. Sweet dreams, she said, heading back toward her Jeep. I stood in my doorway watching her drive away, my hand pressed to the spot where she'd kissed me, feeling like I'd just taken the first step toward something that could either save me or destroy me completely. That night, I wrote 3 new songs. They poured out of me like water from a broken dam, raw, honest, full of hope and terror in equal measure. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing what I thought someone else wanted to hear. I was writing what I needed to say. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and revolutionary. Kennedy and I texted throughout the days, good morning messages that made me smile over my coffee, photos of interesting sea creatures from her research dives, voice notes of song fragments I'd hummed while walking on the beach. We went on more dates, each one feeling less like an audition and more like a conversation between 2 people discovering they genuinely liked each other. Kennedy took me to tide pools at dawn, where she showed me anemones and hermit crabs with the enthusiasm of someone sharing her most treasured secrets. I brought her to small venues around the county, letting her hear my music in intimate settings where every emotion rang clear and true. She never once suggested I change anything, not the melancholy of my lyrics, not the intensity of my delivery, not the way I closed my eyes and lost myself completely when I sang. Instead, she watched me with this expression of wonder, like she was witnessing something magical. "You realize you're extraordinary, right?" she said one evening after I'd finished a set at a coffee shop in San Luis Obispo. We were walking to her Jeep, my guitar case slung over my shoulder, the night air cool and crisp around us. "I'm really not," I said automatically, the denial so practiced it came without thought. Kennedy stopped walking. "Elena, do you hear? Yourself? You just moved a room full of strangers to tears with a song you wrote about childhood loneliness, and your immediate response is to diminish it." Her frustration was gentle but unmistakable. "What would it take for you to accept a compliment without deflecting it?" I considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I don't know." Sarah spent 3 years convincing me that anything good about my music was because of her guidance, and anything unsuccessful was because I wasn't following her advice closely enough. That's emotional abuse. You know that, right? The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the relationship in terms of manipulation, control, damage, but abuse felt like too strong a word. Abuse was dramatic, violent, obvious. What Sarah had done was subtle, insidious. "I know that look," Kennedy said softly. "You're minimizing again. Tell me what she actually did to you." We'd reached her Jeep, but neither of us made a move to get in. Instead, we leaned against the side, the metal still warm from the day's sun. "She isolated me from other musicians," I said slowly, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "Said they were jealous of my talent and would try to hold me back." Then she criticized every song I wrote that didn't fit her vision of commercial success. She controlled what I wore to performances, how I did my hair, even how I spoke between songs. Kennedy's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. She went through my phone, said she was just trying to help me network more effectively. She managed my money, claiming she was better with finances. And whenever I pushed back or tried to assert myself, she'd remind me how much she'd done for me, how ungrateful I was being. Speaking it out loud made the pattern impossible to ignore. How had I not seen it at the time? By the end, I couldn't make a decision without wondering what she'd think. I second-guessed every creative choice, every outfit, every conversation. I wasn't Elena anymore. I was Sarah's version of Elena. Kennedy was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd shared. When she spoke, her voice was fierce with protective anger. "Elena, that is absolutely abuse. Emotional, psychological, financial. She systematically broke down your sense of self and made you dependent on her approval." Kennedy turned to face me fully, and the fact that you're still questioning whether you deserve better shows how effective she was. Tears pricked at my eyes. I stayed for 3 years. I let her do all of that. What does that say about me? That you're human. That you wanted to be loved and were willing to accept a counterfeit version rather than be alone. Kennedy's voice gentled. "Elena, staying doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who was manipulated by an expert manipulator. How do you know so much about this?" Kennedy looked out at the parking lot, her expression distant. "My sister went through something similar with her ex-husband. Took her years to leave, longer to rebuild her sense of self. Watching her go through that ... it teaches you to recognize the signs. Is she okay now? She's thriving. We're married to an amazing man who thinks she hung the moon, has a career she loves, 2 kids who adore her. But it took time and therapy. and a lot of people reminding her who she really was underneath all the damage. Kennedy looked back at me. The point is, healing is possible. You're not permanently broken just because someone tried to break you. The words settled into my chest like a warm embrace. For the first time since Sarah had left, I felt like maybe there was a version of this story where I came out whole. Can I ask you something? I said, always. Why me? You could date anyone, someone less complicated, less damaged, less likely to have panic attacks in restaurant bathrooms. Kennedy laughed, but it wasn't unkind. First of all, everyone's complicated. Everyone has damage. The difference is whether you're working on it or letting it define you. She reached for my hand, threading our fingers together. Second, you want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone brave enough to put her pain into art, someone who cares so deeply about authenticity that she's willing to sacrifice commercial success for it. I see someone who lights up when she talks about music, who cries at sunset, who remembers the names of coffee shop baristas. My throat tightened with emotion. But mostly, Kennedy continued, I see someone who's fighting her way back to herself. Someone who's choosing courage over comfort, growth over stagnation. That's incredibly attractive, Elena. Your healing journey isn't something I'm tolerating, it's something I admire. Even when I'm a mess. Even when I overthink everything and need constant reassurance, especially then. Because you're being honest about where you are instead of pretending to be somewhere you're not. Kennedy squeezed my hand. Elena, I'm not interested in the polished, perfect version of you that Sarah tried to create. I'm interested in the real you, messy, complicated, beautifully imperfect you. Something inside my chest cracked open then, some frozen place that had been locked away since Sarah left. Maybe it was Kennedy's unwavering acceptance, or maybe it was finally saying the truth about what I'd endured out loud. Whatever it was, I felt something shift, like ice breaking up on a river in spring. I think I'm falling for you, I whispered, the admission terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Kennedy's smile was radiant. Yeah, and it scares the hell out of me. Good scared or bad scared? I considered the question, both. Like jumping off a cliff, but trusting that you know how to fly. I don't know how to fly, Kennedy said solemnly, but I'm excellent at swimming, and I promise I won't let you drown. This time, when she leaned in to kiss me, I didn't pull away. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of the wine we'd shared over dinner. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving me space to respond or retreat as I chose. I chose to respond, my free hand coming up to cup her cheek as I kissed her back with months of suppressed longing. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kennedy rested her forehead against mine. Was that okay? She asked. More than okay, I managed. Perfect, actually. Just perfect. I was aiming for earth-shattering. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Don't get cocky. We'll work up to earth-shattering. Is that a promise? That's a promise. Summer deepened around us, and so did whatever was growing between Kennedy and me. We spent long days exploring tide pools and hidden beaches, Kennedy sharing her knowledge of marine ecosystems while I pointed out how the light changed throughout the day, how different times cast the ocean in completely different moods. I started writing songs about joy for the first time in years. Not the forced commercial happiness that Sarah had pushed me toward, but real joy, the kind that bubbles up from deep inside when you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Kennedy heard them first, sprawled on a blanket in her living room while I played her my latest compositions. She listened with her whole body, the way she did everything, completely present and engaged. That one, she said after I finished. A song about learning to trust again. That one needs to be heard by more people. It's too personal, I said automatically. Too specific to my situation, Elena. Kennedy sat up, fixing me with that steady gaze that always saw right through my deflections. The most personal songs are the most universal. That's what makes them powerful. She was right, of course. The songs that had changed my life, the ones that made me feel less alone, more understood, were all deeply personal expressions that somehow spoke to universal experiences. I've been thinking, Kennedy continued, settling back against the couch cushions. You should record some of this new material. Put together an EP, something that represents who you are now. The suggestion sent a familiar spike of anxiety through my system. Recording meant industry involvement, which meant potential rejection. Criticism, the possibility of being told once again that I wasn't quite right for the market. I don't know, I said, fidgeting with my guitar pick. The music industry is complicated. Lots of people trying to mold you into what they think will sell. So don't work with those people? Kennedy made it sound so simple, like there was a whole other industry full of people who actually cared about artistry over profit margins. It's not that easy. Everyone wants to maximize commercial potential, minimize risk. Songs like these, I gestured to my guitar, they're not exactly top 40 material. Good. Top 40 is boring. Despite my anxiety, I smiled. Kennedy had this way of cutting through my overthinking with simple, direct truths. There are independent labels, Elena, producers who specialize in authentic, artist-driven music. People who understand that commercial success and artistic integrity don't have to be mutually exclusive. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. My friend Marcus works in A&R for an indie label based in Santa Barbara. They focus on singer-songwriters, prioritize artistic vision over market trends. Want me to ask if he'd listen to some demos? Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to stay safe in my small world of coffee shop performances and beach cleanups. But another voice, one that sounded suspiciously like Kennedy, whispered that maybe it was time to trust myself again. What? If he hates it? I asked. What if he thinks I'm too weird, too intense, too much? Then he's not the right person to work with. But Elena, what if he loves it? What if he hears exactly what I hear? Someone with something important to say and the talent to say it beautifully. Kennedy reached for my free hand, anchoring me the way she always did when my anxiety started spiraling. You don't have to decide right now, but will you at least think about it? Will you consider the possibility that your music deserves to be heard by more people? I squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her steady confidence in me. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. We spent the rest of the evening talking about music, about the difference between commercial success and artistic fulfillment, about the courage required to put your real self into the world, knowing some people might not understand or appreciate it. Can I tell you something? Kennedy said as we cleaned up from dinner, moving around her kitchen with the easy familiarity we'd developed over the past months. Always. Watching you reclaim your voice, your confidence, your sense of self, it's been incredible. You're not the same person I met at that fundraiser. I paused in loading the dishwasher, considering her words. She was right. Something fundamental had shifted over the summer, some internal realignment that made me feel more solid, more sure of who I was and what I wanted. I feel different, I admitted. Stronger, maybe. Less afraid of taking up space. What changed? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. You, partly. Having someone see value in my authentic self instead of trying to improve or modify it. But also, I think I just got tired of being small. Kennedy nodded, understanding immediately. Sarah trained you to make yourself smaller so she could feel bigger? But small doesn't serve you or your music or the people who need to hear what you have to say. Sometimes I still catch myself doing it, apologizing for my opinions, downplaying my successes, making myself less so other people feel more comfortable. That's normal. Unlearning patterns takes time. Kennedy dried her hands on a dish towel, then turned to face me fully. But Elena, you're not responsible for other people's comfort with your existence. You're responsible for showing up authentically and letting them deal with their own reactions. The words hit deep, settling into places that had been tender for so long. I'd forgotten they could heal. How did you get so wise? I asked, therapy mostly. And watching my sister rebuild herself from the ground up. Kennedy smiled. Plus, it's easier to see clearly when it's someone else's situation. When it's your own life, you're too close. To have perspective. Is that your way of saying you have blind spots too? Oh, absolutely. Ask me about my tendency to try to fix everyone's problems instead of letting them figure things out themselves. I laughed, recognizing the trait immediately. Like suggesting your friend Nada or listen to my demos. Exactly like that. Kennedy had the grace to look sheepish. I'm working on offering support without trying to orchestrate outcomes. It's a process. Good thing I like your particular brand of meddling. It's not meddling, it's enthusiastic encouragement. Is that what we're calling it? Kennedy moved closer, sliding her arms around my waist. What would you call it? Love, I said without thinking, then froze. We hadn't said that word yet, had been dancing around it for weeks, like it might explode if spoken aloud. Kennedy's eyes widened, but her smile was pure sunshine. Yeah. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't take it back. Yeah, I love how much you believe in me, how you see potential I can't see myself. I love your passion for the ocean, your terrible taste in movies, the way you make me feel like I'm enough exactly as I am. Elena. Kennedy's voice was soft with wonder. I love you too. All of you, the anxious parts and the confident parts and everything in between. This time, when she kissed me, it was anything but gentle. Months of tension and growing intimacy poured into the connection, and I lost myself completely in the feeling of being wanted, valued, loved for exactly who I was. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kennedy rested her forehead against mine. So, she said, her voice slightly hoarse, about that demo. I laughed, the sound mixing nervousness and joy in equal measure. You're relentless. Only when it comes to things that matter. And you, Elena Martinez, definitely matter. Looking into her eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Belief in myself that came from within, not from external validation. Okay, I said, let's do it. Let's make a demo and see what happens. Kennedy's kiss tasted like possibility. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a sleek conference room in Santa Barbara, trying not to fidget with my guitar strap while Marcus Chun Kennedy's friend, an A&R representative for Tidal, records listened to my demo with an expression I couldn't read. Kennedy sat beside me, radiating supportive energy, while across the table Marcus nodded along to the music with what seemed like genuine interest. When the last song faded, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Elena, this is exactly what we're looking for. Authentic, emotionally resonant, beautifully crafted. Your voice is distinctive without being affected, and your songwriting has real depth. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. Why, oh, you like it? I love it. These songs feel lived in, honest. They tell stories that matter. Marcus pulled out a folder. I'd like to offer you a development deal studio time to record a full EP. Marketing support, distribution through our network. We're talking about a real launch, not just throwing your music into the void. My hands were shaking as I accepted the contract to review. This was everything I dreamed of before Sarah convinced me I wasn't good enough, before I'd learned to make myself smaller to fit other people's expectations. There's just one thing, Marcus continued, and my stomach dropped. Here it came, the catch, the compromise, the inevitable suggestion that I change something fundamental about my music to make it more commercially viable. We love the authenticity of your lyrics, but some of them are quite intense, emotional. We'd want to balance the EP with some lighter material, maybe something more radio friendly for the lead single. The familiar anxiety crept up my throat. What kind of lighter material? Nothing dramatic. Just maybe tone down some of the rawness, make the themes more universally relatable. Love songs that don't require so much emotional investment from the listener. Kennedy's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. I could feel her tension, could practically hear her thinking. This is exactly what Sarah used to say. Can I ask which songs specifically feel too intense? I managed. Marcus consulted his notes. Well, Undertow is beautiful, but it's quite heavy for a lead single. And Breaking Point, while incredibly powerful, might be too dark for mainstream radio. We'd love to keep them on the EP, just maybe not as the primary promotional focus. I stared at the contract in my hands, the words blurring as Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Too much, too emotional, too intense. You'll never make it if you're too much of yourself. But then Kennedy's voice cut through the noise. The most personal songs are the most universal. That's what makes them powerful. Those songs, I said slowly, are the most honest things I've ever written. They're about surviving emotional abuse, about learning to trust again, about the courage it takes to be authentic in a world that wants you to be palatable. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. They're incredibly moving. We just think they might work better as deep cuts, you know? Let people discover them after they're already invested in your sound. But they are my sound, I said, finding my voice. The intensity, the raw emotion, that's not separate from who I am as an artist. That's the core of who I am as an artist. I felt Kennedy's pride radiating from beside me, giving me strength to continue. I spent 3 years trying to be a more palatable version of myself, and it nearly destroyed me as a person and as a musician. I won't do that again, not even for a record deal. Marcus looked surprised by my firmness. Elena, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm just suggesting we lead with something more accessible, then let people find the deeper material organically. But you're asking me to hide the parts of myself that might make people uncomfortable. You're asking me to present a safer version of Elena Martinez to get people in the door, then spring the real me on them later. I stood up, my decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. That's not authenticity, that's marketing. And I'm not interested in being marketed. Elena, wait. Marcus held up his hands. Let's not be hasty here. This is a good deal, a real opportunity. Most artists would kill for this kind of support. Then offer it to most artists. Offer it to someone who's willing to compromise their vision for commercial success. I gathered my guitar case and my dignity. I'm not most artists. Kennedy was already standing, her expression fierce with pride and support. She's right, Marcus. Elena's music works because it's uncompromising. The moment she starts editing herself for mass appeal, she becomes just another singer-songwriter with nothing important to say. We walked out of that conference room together, my heart pounding with adrenaline and terror in equal measure. In the elevator, Kennedy pulled me into her arms. I am so fucking proud of you, she whispered against my hair. I just turned down a record deal, I said, the reality hitting me. A real record deal with studio time and marketing and distribution. You turned down the wrong record deal. There's a difference. What if there isn't a right one? What if I just made the biggest mistake of my career? Kennedy pulled back to look at me, her eyes blazing with certainty. Elena, you just proved that you'd rather be authentic and unsigned than successful and compromised. That's not a mistake, that's integrity. In the parking lot, I called my parents to tell them what had happened. My mother's reaction was predictably practical. Mia, are you sure you made the right choice? Record deals don't come along every day. I'm sure, Mom. It would have meant changing everything that makes my music special. But think of the opportunities, the exposure, Mom. I looked at Kennedy, who was watching me with complete faith in my decision. I'd rather play coffee shops forever as myself than play stadiums as someone else. There was a pause, then my father's voice in the background. Tell her we're proud of her for sticking to her principles. My mother sighed. Your father says? He's proud of you. And, Mia, I suppose he's right. You've always been too stubborn for your own good, but maybe this time that's exactly what you needed to be. After I hung up, Kennedy and I drove to our favorite beach, the same one where we'd met at the fundraiser all those months ago. We sat on a piece of driftwood and watched the waves, processing what had just happened. Are you okay? Kennedy asked. Really okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay with walking away from everything I thought I wanted? Was I okay with choosing uncertainty over compromise? I'm terrified, I admitted, but I'm also free. For the first time in years, I made a decision based on my own values, instead of what someone else thought was best for me. But it's huge, Elena. That's growth in real time. Sarah would have killed me if I'd walked away from a deal like that. Sarah would have taken the deal and spent the next 3 years slowly erasing everything unique about your music until you were just another generic pop artist, wondering what happened to your soul. Kennedy was right. I could picture it perfectly, the gradual compromises, the increasing distance from my authentic voice, the eventual realization that I'd traded my artistry for commercial success and ended up with neither. So what now? I asked, where do I go from here? Kennedy smiled, that radiant expression that had first caught my attention at the fundraiser. Now you make your music on your own terms. You find the people who want to hear what you actually have to say, not what you think they want to hear. And if no one wants to hear it, then at least you'll know you stayed true to yourself. But Elena? Kennedy took my hand, anchoring me, the way she always did. I have a feeling there are a lot more people out there who need to hear your real songs than you realize. That evening, I wrote a new song, not about heartbreak or healing, but about choice. About the courage it takes to walk away from what looks like everything you want because you know it will cost you everything you are. It was the first song I'd ever written about feeling proud of myself. The weeks following my rejection of the title records deal were a whirlwind of second-guessing, panic, and ultimately the most creative period of my life. Kennedy was right walking away from a compromise that would have diluted my artistic vision, freed me to explore exactly what my music could become when I stopped worrying about what anyone else thought. I set up a small home studio in my apartment. Spare bedroom, investing the money I'd been saving for emergencies into decent recording equipment. If the music industry wasn't ready for my authentic voice, I'd create that voice independently and let the industry catch up. The first song I recorded was Undertow, the same song that had started everything at the beach fundraiser. But this version was different, fuller, layered with the confidence I'd gained over the months of dating Kennedy and rediscovering myself. When I played it back, I heard something I'd never heard in my own music before, complete authenticity without apology. Kennedy came over while I was working on the second track, bringing coffee and takeout from our favorite Vietnamese place. She settled into the corner of my makeshift studio, listening as I laid down guitar tracks for a song about learning to trust again. This is incredible, she said when I paused to adjust levels. Elena, this sounds professional. Like, really? Professional. YouTube University, I said, gesturing to my laptop where I'd been watching recording tutorials for the past week. Turns out you can learn anything if you're motivated enough. It's more than that. You're producing this with such clear vision, such intention. Every choice serves the song. She was right. Without the pressure of external expectations, I was making decisions based purely on what felt right for each piece of music. The result was more cohesive and personally satisfying than anything I'd recorded during my years with Sarah. I've been thinking, Kennedy said, settling back with her spring rolls. What if we documented this process? Not for anyone else, just for us. Videos of you working, writing, recording. A behind the scenes look at what it's like to create music completely independently. The idea intrigued me, like a video diary. Exactly. And maybe if you decide you want to share it later, people could see what authentic music creation actually looks like. No corporate interference, no committee decisions. Just an artist following her instincts. I considered the suggestion while tweaking the EQ on my vocal track. There was something appealing about documenting this journey, especially since it felt so different from the manufactured process I'd experienced with Sarah's management. We could call it tide pools, I said suddenly. You know, like those. Little ecosystems that exist independently of the larger ocean. Self-contained, but still connected to something bigger. Kennedy's smile lit up her entire face. That's perfect. Tide pools, the Elena Martinez sessions. We spent the next hour setting up a simple video system, just Kennedy's camera and some basic lighting. The first episode we recorded was me explaining my decision to walk away from the record deal, talking directly to the camera while my half-finished EP played softly in the background. I realized that I'd rather reach 10 people authentically than 10,000 people with a diluted version of my truth, I said, looking directly into the lens. Maybe that makes me naive or uncommercial, but it also makes me me. And after years of trying to be someone else, being me feels like the most radical thing I can do. Kennedy posted the first episode on YouTube and my social media accounts without asking, and I only found out when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Kennedy, I said, staring at the view count that was climbing steadily. You didn't tell me you were going to share it. I knew you'd overthink it and talk yourself out of it, she said unapologetically. Sometimes you need someone to push you into the deep end. She was right, as usual. By the end of the day, the video had been viewed over 1,000 times, with comments from other independent artists sharing their own stories of choosing authenticity over commercial viability. Look at this, I said, reading the comments aloud. Thank you for reminding me why I started making music in the first place. Your courage to walk away from that deal inspired me to leave my toxic management situation. Please keep making real music in a world full of manufactured sound. Kennedy curled up beside me on the couch, reading over my shoulder. Elena, you're building community. You're showing other artists that there's another way to do this. Over the next month, I released a new Tide Pools episode every week, each one documenting a different aspect of independent music creation. I showed myself writing lyrics at 2 a.m., struggling with harmonies, celebrating small breakthroughs, dealing with technical difficulties. The audience grew steadily, drawn to the transparency and authenticity of the process. More importantly, my music began reaching people who genuinely connected with it, not because it had been focus grouped and market tested, but because it spoke to experiences they recognized, healing from toxic relationships, finding the courage to be authentic, choosing self-respect over external validation. Elena, Kennedy said one evening as we walked along our favorite beach, have you looked at your streaming numbers lately? I hadn't, actually. I'd been so focused on the creative process that I'd barely paid attention to metrics. When I checked my phone, I was shocked to see that Undertow had been streamed over 50,000 times, with Breaking Point not far behind. This is organic growth, Kennedy pointed out. No radio play, no playlist placements, no marketing budget. Just people finding their music and sharing it because it means something to them. She was right. The comments on my songs were different from anything I'd seen during my Sarah years deeply personal responses from listeners who felt seen and understood. People sharing their own stories of survival, recovery, self-discovery. I think I'm ready, I said suddenly. Ready for what? To perform live again. Really live, not just coffee shops and beach cleanups. I want to play these songs for people who choose to be there because they connect with the music. Kennedy stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression blazing with pride. Elena, that's huge. What changed? I thought about it, watching the waves roll in under the star-filled sky. I'm not afraid of being too much anymore. If my music is intense, emotional, raw good, the people who need to hear it will find it, and the people who don't connect with it aren't my audience anyway. You're talking about curating your audience instead of trying to appeal to everyone. Exactly. I'd rather have a smaller group of people who really get it than a massive audience that only likes the watered-down version. Kennedy pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. There's a music festival in Big Sur next month. All independent artists, very intimate setting. They prioritize authenticity over commercial appeal. Want me to reach out to the organizers? The old Elena would have panicked, would have found 17 reasons why it was too soon, too risky, too presumptuous. But this Elena, the one who'd walked away from a record deal, who'd built her own studio, who documented her journey without apology, felt ready. Yes, I said without hesitation. Let's do it. Kennedy's kiss tasted like salt air and possibility, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The Redwood Sessions Festival was everything Kennedy had promised, intimate, authentic, focused on artistry over commerce. Set in a grove of ancient redwoods 30 miles south of Big Sur, it felt more like a spiritual retreat than a music festival. The audience sat on blankets and in low chairs, close enough to see every expression on the performers' faces. I was scheduled to play the sunset slot on the second day, which Kennedy assured me was an honor usually reserved for established artists. The organizers had been impressed by my Tide Pool series and the organic growth of my streaming numbers. You're representing something important, said Marina, the festival director, during our pre-show meeting. Independent artists who are choosing authenticity over industry approval. There are more of us than people realize. The hours leading up to my performance were a meditation and controlled panic. I'd played for larger crowds before, but never as completely myself. Every song in my set was deeply personal, written during my journey back to authenticity. There was no hiding behind crowd pleasers or cover songs. Kennedy found me backstage an hour before my set, sitting with my guitar and running through my opening song for the 100th time. How are you feeling? She asked, settling beside me on the equipment case I was using as a chair. Terrified, exhilarated, like I'm about to jump off a cliff. Good cliff or bad cliff? I considered the question, checking in with my body and emotions. The nervousness was there, but underneath it was something solid, something sure. Good. Cliff, the kind where you're scared but you trust your wings. Kennedy smiled, that radiant expression that had become my anchor over the past months. Elena, you're going to be incredible up there. Not because you're going to perform perfectly, but because you're going to be completely yourself. That's what these people came to see. She was right. Looking out at the gathering audience, I saw faces that reminded me of the comments on my videos, people hungry for authentic connection, for music that acknowledged the full spectrum of human experience. When Marina introduced me, she mentioned my decision to walk away from a record deal to maintain artistic integrity. The applause was warm and supportive, less like appreciation for entertainment and more like recognition of shared values. I opened with Undertow, the song that had started everything, but this version performed in a cathedral of redwoods for an audience of fellow truth seekers felt like a completely different experience. The lyrics about being pulled towards something that might consume you, but being unable to resist took a new meaning in this setting. It wasn't just about romantic attraction anymore. It was about the pull toward authentic self-expression despite the risks. By the second song, I'd found my rhythm. The audience was with me completely, following every emotional turn, breathing with the music in that way that only happens when performer and audience are perfectly aligned. This next song, I said into the microphone, is about choosing yourself over what other people think you should be. It's about the moment you realize that being too much for some people means you're just enough for the right ones. The crowd responded with knowing laughter and applause. I glanced at Kennedy, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, watching me with that same intensity she'd had the first night we met. I played Breaking Point, the song Marcus had called too dark for radio. But here, under the redwoods, it wasn't too dark, it was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was its own kind of light. As I moved into the final song, a new one, written just for this moment, I felt something shift inside me. The fear of being too much had dissolved. The need for approval had faded. All that remained was the music, the trees, the people listening, and the woman who had believed in me before I could believe in myself. When the last note faded, the silence was profound. Then the applause came, not the polite clapping of obligated listeners, but the roar of people who had been moved, who had felt something real. After the set, audience members approached me with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of breaking free from expectations. One woman gripped my hand and said, "Thank you for reminding me that my voice matters." Kennedy found me as I was packing up, her eyes shining. "You were magnificent," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I felt it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I finally felt what it's like to be completely myself on stage. She pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. "That's because you weren't performing for them. You were performing for you." And she was right. For the first time in my life, I hadn't been trying to fit into someone else's idea of what music or love or life should be. I had simply been. That night, under a sky full of stars, Kennedy and I walked back to our campsite hand in hand. The festival continued around us, laughter, distant music, the crackle of bonfires, but all I could focus on was the warmth of her fingers laced through mine. "You know," she said, squeezing my hand, "this is just the beginning." I smiled, looking up at the towering redwoods, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. "Yeah," I said, "it really is." And for once, I believed it.